Overhauling your coaching staff right after completing a disappointing season is one thing, but firing 4 coaches just 2 months before the next year begins, it's clear Penny Hardaway is feeling the pressure big time at Memphis.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Thursday, and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host for today, Andy Patton, and you're joining at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. Yes, I know we are just starting the second week of the college football season, but this show is all college hoops, 5 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year. I want to give a special shout out to our everyday listeners and those of you who have joined us on our Discord channel. If you haven't done so yet, free to join. There's a link in the show notes on both audio and video platforms. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, we got a lot of different things to cover today here on Locked On College Basketball. We're going to take a look at some of the charity exhibition games that we know about. John Rothstein tweeted out a list. We're going to talk about those games, what we know, when they're going to be, some fun details about that. We're also going to talk about Auburn's non-conference schedule, folks. This is legit. We say on the show a lot, we bag on some teams that, some competitive teams that don't schedule very competitive non-conference schedules, and we want to celebrate the teams that do. Auburn, Bruce Pearl, big shouts from us. This is a tremendous schedule. We'll talk about that. In the second segment, we're going to lead the show with the big news that came out of the college basketball world on Wednesday morning. Penny Hardaway has let go of 3 of his coaches and 4 total staff members from the Memphis Tigers less than 2 months, or about 2 months, until the start of the college basketball season. Coach Rick Stansbury, Slick Rick, as he is known, a very high-level recruiter, Farragher Phillips, and Jamie Rosser were all fired. All of them were assistant coaches for the Memphis Tigers. They were all fired. An announcement came out on Wednesday morning that they were let go. Same with special assistant Demetrius Dyson. So 4 staff members, 3 coaches, all let go. And there was no reason provided for this departure, for the dismissals. There was a statement released by the university, a statement from Penny Hardaway specifically. I'm going to read it here. We're going to talk a little bit about the timing and what this might mean for the Tigers. Here's the statement. I want to thank Rick, Farragher, Jamie, and Demetrius for their service to the University of Memphis and our basketball program. These are good coaches that I've worked with closely over the past few seasons, but I made the difficult decision to go in a new direction with our staff. The timing is not ideal, but I want to give this team the best opportunity to reach our goals of winning the American Conference and advancing in the NCAA Tournament. With the season rapidly approaching, we are going to move quickly to complete the staff. So basically, Penny fired 3 coaches and a special assistant without obvious people to replace them. Now, just because he says we're going to start the search now, we're going to move quickly, maybe there's some names they have in mind. We've already heard some rumors. I'm not going to talk about them until we know anything final, but there have been some names that have been tossed out there that might be connected. And I have to assume that Penny has an idea how he wants to fill most, if not all, of these spots on his coaching staff. But what a terrible time to do this for all parties involved. It's bad timing for Penny Hardaway, who now has to spend time he should be preparing to ramp up for the season, practice time, the start of the academic school year, all that stuff. He now has to spend that time trying to hire coaches, see if they're a fit in his culture, see if his fellow or if the rest of the staff, which isn't very many at this point, like these coaches, if the players like these coaches, if the administrators like these coaches. He's got to spend all his time focused on that right now instead of focusing on getting ready for the upcoming year. So it's bad timing for Penny. It's obviously awful timing for his players, who now had these connections, and it's a brand new roster, only 1 returner from last year's team. So it's a lot of new faces, new players. They were just starting to get used to their new coaches. Now they're going to get another new set of coaches coming in. Who knows how the gelling will go in that situation? They won't have a lot of time to really get to know each other until they're traveling and they're going out together for the season as it gets started. And it's also just awful timing for these coaches who are now hung out to dry. Presumably they want to continue to work in Division I college basketball space, and the opportunities to get a job in that space this year are slim to none. And I mean, that to me, this is tough news for Penny, but he chose it. It's tough for the players, but they'll adapt. They'll figure it out. Their head coach is still there. The general system is still in place, but it's just awful for these coaches who are going to have incredibly limited opportunities to find new work this year. They may have to take a year off. They may have to freelance, consult, maybe coach at the high school level if they can find a job doing that, and try to get back into Division I college basketball next year. Who knows? Maybe something will crop up. There's still a couple of months till the season gets started. Obviously, things change, and there's 360 Division I schools, so there's going to be opportunities. But who wants to be looking for a job right now in this space, in this environment? I mean, it's just a really frustrating situation for them. And just it's a bad look. It's a bad look for Penny. It's a bad look for Memphis. This is a team that has only made the NCAA tournament twice in the 6 years since Penny Hardaway took over as head coach. They are having massive amounts of turnover. And look, that's true across all of college basketball. It's not like having, significant amounts of your roster turnover year over year is only happening at Memphis, but it's happening there a lot. And you start to pay attention to those things when you see, okay, we're not only having significant roster turnover year over year for a program that presumably has a decent NIL package that is expected to compete for NCAA tournaments. Like those kind of teams that are set up to be successful in their conference, have highly regarded coaches, have money to spend on players. They're not usually the teams that are turning over their roster year over year. So that's something to definitely keep an eye on, to pay attention to. Again, 7 guys transferred out of Memphis this offseason, 8 Division I transfers coming in. They got some good ones. Tyrese Hunter, one of the best transfers to a non-high major program in all of college basketball, coming over from Texas. They get PJ Haggerty from Tulsa, among others. But it kind of feels like the coaches who helped land those players, potentially Rick Stansbury, again, a guy who's known for his recruiting, just went out and rebuilt a roster for Penny Hardaway, and then he canned them 2 months before the season started. Obviously, we don't know all the details. And I think that's an important caveat. Is it possible that there is an underlying reason that we haven't heard about yet for why these coaches were dismissed? Of course. It could come out very soon and make parts of this conversation look obsolete. But if there is not, then this just feels like really rushed and unfortunate timing, and it's hard to see what the vision might be for Hardaway and the Tigers, who Penny's got to be getting close to his last stand. Like we said, been in the NCAA tournament twice in the 6 years he's been the head coach. Won one game, that was against Boise State in 2022, before a loss to Gonzaga in the second round that year. Last year they started 15-2, 10. They were as high as number 10 in the AP poll. Then they went 7 of 8 to close the season, and that was it. That was that. Did not make the NCAA tournament, like we said, 2 out of the last 6 years. There have been multiple off-the-court issues for Penny Hardaway already. There was an 18-month investigation into his relationship with James Wiseman. Now, he was not found to have violated any rules there. Again, that's important to acknowledge, but there was still a long investigation. He was then suspended 3 games for recruiting violations last summer, separate from the James Wiseman incident. Malcolm Dandridge last year was held out for the final 5 games of the year when the university conducted an investigation into his eligibility. So we're having multiple issues of recruiting violations, alleged recruiting violations, eligibility concerns. We're seeing entire rosters turn over year. Now he's firing his coaching staff 2 months before the season begins. If you're a Memphis fan right now, you got to be starting to wonder, hey, what's the leash here? How much longer do we put up with this? If he's gone to 2 NCAA tournaments after 7 years, is he still going to have his job? If Florida Atlantic makes it over them next year with a brand new coach and a new roster, does he still keep his job? What if it's South Florida and Amir Abdur-Rahim and the phenomenal job that he's done over there? This is something to keep an eye on. Penny's a legacy hire. He's a Memphis alum. He's a former NBA superstar. We've seen a lot of those guys not pan out. I know Jerry Stackhouse wasn't connected to Vanderbilt, but he's one of the more recent coaches. Juwan Howard, obviously the most notable example recently. This doesn't always work. And for Penny, there was a lot of optimism that it would, and he recruited well, and he's brought in some high-level talent. But I think it's pretty fair to say at this point that it hasn't worked yet. And maybe the turnaround will happen this year. Maybe they'll have a great year. But I got to tell you, it's not off to a great start when you're firing three of your coaches and 4 of your staff members in early September. Well, folks, Auburn, Bruce Pearl and the Tigers, they put together an incredibly competitive non-conference slate. Bruce Pearl definitely looking to put last year's round 1 loss to Yale in the rearview mirror. We're going to talk about it in just a second. Right after I tell you folks about FanDuel. Folks, you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Usually this summer, we've been filling you in on how to get a boost or a bonus offer from FanDuel. Well, we have something a little bit different for you now. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a three-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. You can cancel anytime. And look, maybe you think I'm full of it. Maybe you think this is the year for Penny and the Tigers. If that's the case, FanDuel's got them at plus 8,000 to bring home the 2025 National Championship. Go ahead and throw your money where your mouth is. Go find that FanDuel. Go throw that money down. Again, $5 gets you free 3 weeks free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket. So check it out. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Moving away from our conversation about Penny Hardaway and the mass exodus of players and now coaches from that program to talk about Auburn's non-conference schedule. And for those of you who are everyday listeners or regular listeners of the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, you know that my co-host Isaac Shade and I we try to talk about as many high-profile non-conference schedules as we can when they come out. And a lot of times that involves poking fun or dunking on teams that do not schedule particularly competitive non-conference slates. We've talked about it with BYU. We've talked about it with Iowa State. We've talked about it with some other teams in the Big 12, even some ACC teams that aren't putting together particularly competitive non-conference schedules. And we know why. We understand that there is a reason behind that the system allows them to schedule these cupcake schedules and beat these teams by 40 or 50 points and move up in the net rankings. And then if other teams in your conference do that, it ends up giving you a more favorable schedule in conference. Like we understand the way the system is set up rewards teams for doing this, and those teams are taking advantage of the system. But we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge when teams go against that trend. We talked about it with Kentucky recently. They have a great non-conference schedule. Kansas, great non-conference schedule. Gonzaga, Alabama, we just talked about them this week as well, also have great non-conference schedules. There are plenty of high-profile college basketball programs, teams that are going to be ranked in the top 10, top 15, top 25, who are willing to schedule tough non-conference slates. Not all of them, but a lot of them are willing to do so. Auburn put them in that category. Their home schedule doesn't sound super great, but they play a bunch of high-profile programs in neutral sites, and they got a really great road game. Here's who they're playing. First, we'll start at home. They got Vermont, which is their opener. Not an easy opener by any stretch. Vermont's been in the tournament, I think, the last 3 years out of the American East Conference. They also got Kent State. They got North Alabama, Richmond, Georgia State, and Monmouth. That is the home slate for Bruce Pearl and the Auburn Tigers. At neutral sites, you have Houston. That game is on November 9th. That game is in Houston, so it's a neutral site, but not really a neutral site. That is a pseudo road game. I think Ken Pomeroy has a term for that. It's a fake, basically a pseudo home game for the Cougars. They also play Ohio State in Atlanta, and then they play Purdue in Birmingham. So that one's a bit of a home game for Auburn of sorts. But you're talking Houston, Ohio State, Purdue, all on neutral sites. And then your road game is to Cameron Indoor to take on the Crazies and the Duke Blue Devils. That is a tremendous slate of neutral site and road games. Duke, Houston, Ohio State, Purdue. Houston and Purdue 1 seeds last year. Duke was a 4 seed last year or 5 seed last year. Duke and Houston are projected to be top 5, top 10 teams at worst in this upcoming season. Purdue is going to be in the top 25 almost certainly. Heck, Ohio State could conceivably be in the top 25 under new coach Jake Diebler there as well. You also got the Maui Invitational. They're going to start against Iowa State. The Cyclones, 3 seed last year or 2 seed last year, one of the best teams in the Big 12. You got Houston and Iowa State on your schedule out of the Big 12. Their second game will be against either Dayton or North Carolina, depending on how that game goes. We expect North Carolina to beat Dayton. So if Auburn beats Iowa State, they will play North Carolina. If they lose, they will likely play Dayton. Either way, certainly North Carolina is the better draw than Dayton. There's no debating that. That's not a conversation, but it's not like Dayton is a bad game either. Dayton's a good team. They're going to be down a little bit after losing Deron Holmes to the NBA, but that's still a quality program, expected to finish at or near the top of the A10. And then their third game will be against somebody in the other half of that bracket as well, another quality opponent, almost certainly for Auburn there. This is great. 5 guaranteed Power 5 opponents, none of them at home. That is awesome. Awesome stuff for Auburn. Might get Duke and North Carolina. Already get Purdue and Houston. Going to get Iowa State. Like we said, Vermont's not a pushover, neither is Kent State. Kent State's a quality program as well. I love this schedule, and it sets them up to be competitive in what's going to be a really good SEC. We've been talking about it lately on the show. The SEC, from a depth perspective, rivals, if not tops, the Big 12. And I think there's a lot of conversation that can be had about the overall quality of those two leagues. I think at the top, you have 5 Big 12 teams that are going to be better than the top 5 in the SEC, just because the Big 12 is incredibly front-loaded with your Kansas, Houston, Baylor, Iowa State, and Arizona. That's an incredible top 5 there. But the thing about the SEC is I think you got Alabama and Auburn 1 and 2. And we talked about this with Lance Dahl, the host of Locked On Kentucky, came on Locked On College Basketball last week. If you missed that show, check it out. It's fantastic stuff. And we talked about how 3 through 9 in the SEC could go a bunch of different directions. So while the Big 12 has a more clear-cut top 5, and I think you could even argue that the SEC, like 2 through 9, could be a bit more, there's a bit more movement. I do think that Bama and Auburn are slightly in their own tier with Florida and Texas A&M and Texas and Kentucky and a handful of other teams. Maybe South Carolina sneaks back in there like they did last year. Maybe Chris Beard and Ole Miss take a leap and they're in that conversation. Chris Jans and Mississippi State could be in that conversation. I'm sure I'm forgetting others. It's going to be a really, really good and deep league for the SEC next year. And Auburn's going to be ready because they're going to play 5 Power 5 teams prior to starting their SEC schedule. They're going to play a true road game at Duke. They're going to play neutral site games, basically a road game against Houston. They got some really fun, competitive games on the schedule. And this team is prepared to legitimately contend. Like we said, last year, as a 4 seed falls to Yale and Spokane in the first round of the NCAA tournament, they're trying to avoid that again. Janai Broome is back. Very likely an All-American. Barring an injury, he's going to be on one of the 3 All-American teams next year, almost certainly. That level of player for Bruce Pearl and the Tigers. They also get Chad Baker-Mazara back. A lot of upside there, a lot of intrigue, a lot of draft people talking about Chad Baker-Mazara for next year as well. They keep Denver Jones, averaged about 9 points a game last year for this team. They had J.P. Pegues, transfer from Furman, who was really good for the Paladins last year. They had Miles Kelly, forward from Georgia Tech, who did some really nice stuff for Damon Stoudemire's team. They had Jaheim Hudson from SMU, all in the portal as well. Get a little bit of addition by subtraction with KD Johnson transferring to George Mason. I'm not trying to bag on KD Johnson, but I think he wasn't a great fit in that Auburn roster anymore. And so him moving on is probably a good thing for the Tigers. They also lose Aiden Holloway and Trey Donaldson. Those are tougher losses. Aiden Holloway never really fit on this team last year. It's a true freshman. I think he's going to do some good stuff for Bama. It's going to be a tough loss for Auburn. Trey Donaldson, talented player, taking his talents to the Big Ten, and new coach Dusty May at Michigan. But I'm optimistic about this Auburn team. I think they are justifiably picked right now to finish second in the SEC. I think Bruce Pearl's done a phenomenal job with this program. I think we'll see them continue to play a deeper rotation than most teams in college basketball. And I think they set themselves up to be competitive right away in the SEC by having roster continuity, which is always vital. Getting your best player back is one of the most important things you can do in the offseason, and they check that box with Broome returning. But they also challenge themselves early and often in the non-conference slate. And I think when it comes down to it, when we get into March, that is going to be a deciding factor for this team's readiness to avoid what happened last year and make a deeper run in the NCAA tournament. Folks, moving on to close the show, talking charity exhibitions. It's a true sign the college hoop season is coming back. We got some that are barely a month away. We got a long list of the ones known at this point. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Right after I tell you all about today's sponsor, LinkedIn Jobs. Folks, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster, and they do it for free. And LinkedIn isn't just another job board. They help you hire professionals that you cannot find anywhere else, even those that aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. And in a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, folks, you're not looking in the right place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that the over 2.5 million small businesses who use LinkedIn are wearing so many hats, and they may not have the time or the resources to hire. And so they're constantly finding ways to make this process even easier, including launching a feature that helps you write your own job descriptions. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Again, that's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, folks, closing out the show today, taking a tweet from John Rothstein of CBS Sports talking about charity exhibitions. For those of you who are newer to the sport, just as a reminder of what this is, we obviously have a finite amount of games you're allowed to schedule in the non-conference slate. Part of that rule is that you are allowed to schedule a certain number of games against non-conference opponents and a certain number of exhibition games. The exhibition games do not count towards your total. And then there's a rule about the number of exhibition games and the number of non-D1 opponents that you are allowed to play. So what we end up seeing is we see a fair amount of teams who use those exhibition games to play local non-D1 programs. Like I know Gonzaga plays Lewis Clark State College, which is a small school in Idaho that's at the NAIA level. They've played Eastern Oregon similarly in a similar region from them in the past. Most other programs have teams like this that they frequently schedule for an exhibition game, kind of just to get their beak wet, as it were, to get the first kind of game action in an environment that doesn't actually count towards your record. Lets you have the opportunity to kind of experiment with some of those lineups and get some of those new guys some floor time. But we also have seen a rise in these charity exhibitions. These tend to be more desirable matchups, either Power 5 teams playing each other or regional matchups that didn't make it onto the actual schedule, but that are being played in environments where if you watch the game, whether you attend the game or if it's on TV or pay-per-view, the money raised for these games goes to charity of some kind. We've seen these games sometimes be set as charity exhibitions, but not actually be a game that fans can watch, or we've seen that with regular exhibition games as well. Closed door scrimmages typically is the name that we see for those, and we may not ever get updates on what happened. We know these two teams played. Nobody was in the building. We don't know what happened. And look, I get it. I get why coaches want to do that, because if you're going to play another good team, a team that you consider on your level, two top 15 teams are going at each other in a secret scrimmage, but you're messing around with a different lineup. You're trying to guide a different position. You're giving your freshmen opportunities, and there's somebody there, or there's multiple people there. There's thousands of people there, and you're running a new offense, and now everybody sees the new offense. And so I understand why coaches are hesitant to have all of those secret scrimmages, things like that, out in the open. But charity exhibitions done for the public, so they can come watch your game, watch your first, scrimmage action of the season against another opponent, raise money for a local charity. That to me is a slam dunk. It can't be required. It's feasibly, it doesn't make sense to require teams to do this, but we should see a lot of them. I think it's an important thing to continue to see. Because raising money for charity is always good, obviously depending on the charity and various other factors, but generally the concept of raising money for a charity while playing basketball is a good thing. It's something that we want to see more of. Fans want to see more of their team. And for the sport to grow, for there to be interest in this sport during the football portion of the season, this is a way to make that happen. And some of the matchups that we have here, again, Rothstein tweeted a list of all of the charity exhibitions that he is aware of at this point. I saw a lot of people commenting with different games that weren't on that list. I didn't add any of those. So if you think, hey, why isn't this game on here? It's because it wasn't part of this tweet from John Rothstein. It doesn't mean it's not necessarily happening. It means that he didn't have a source confirming that it was happening. Here are the games. I'm just going to read them here, and we can talk about a few of these matchups that he has reported at this point. St. John's at Rutgers. Date is to be determined on that one. UConn and Rhode Island on the 14th of October. Ohio State at Cincinnati on the 18th. Xavier at Dayton and Michigan against Oakland, both on the 20th of October. Purdue at Creighton on the 26th. My goodness, what a matchup. Wish we'd gotten that one last year. Ryan Kalkbrenner and Zach Edey. Wow, sign that thing up. Texas A&M at Houston, the 27th. Same with Illinois at Ole Miss, also on the 27th. Same with Arizona State at Duke. Bobby Hurley going back to his alma mater to go play at Cameron Indoor at the Duke Blue Devils on the 27th of October. And then Alabama, Memphis. Just spent a lot of time talking about Penny Hardaway's team there. That game set for December 28th. What a great slate of games. I'm incredibly excited to see these matchups, to see how they play out. Hopefully we'll get opportunities to either watch them live or at least get updates or get reaction to them. I'm thinking some of them might end up being on pay-per-view. Some of them might be on streaming services that are not necessarily available to everybody. We'll see kind of what all comes out of that. But if these events can raise money for charity, can get more eyeballs on their product, because that's what matters here. And I think sometimes that gets lost a little bit. Obviously, there's multiple things that matter when talking about college basketball. The student athlete experience is important and various things like that. But ultimately, college basketball doesn't survive and doesn't thrive without generating fan interest. And if this is a way to generate more fan interest, have your team play marquee exhibition opponents in a charity situation, raise money for a good cause. It's good PR for your school, and it gets more eyeballs on your team in October before the season starts. A lot of people don't tune into college basketball until Feast Week, Thanksgiving. A lot more people don't tune into college basketball until March. We know this. Everybody knows this. We know this because we know what our numbers look like on the show. You all know that because your friends, if you're listening to a college basketball podcast in September, you're a diehard. Welcome. We appreciate you. We love you. We love having you here. If you are a diehard, you know that a lot of your friends start talking to you about college basketball about 6 months from now. If this is going to help in any way, these charity exhibitions, Purdue at Creighton. I know those are not football schools. Creighton, quite literally, Purdue, figuratively, not a football school. But if that's going to help generate interest, if Ohio State basketball going to Cincinnati, played an in-state rivalry game in an exhibition in October 18th, if that's going to generate interest in the basketball programs 3 weeks before the season starts, heck yeah, do it. I'm all for it. And it's going to raise money for a good cause. It's a win-win. Love the charity exhibitions. Excited about this slate. I'm sure there are more. I know Arkansas has been rumored to play some big ones. I know Baylor's looking at potentially playing some big ones. There's going to be some more fun exhibitions, whether they are of the charity ilk or just regular exhibitions or closed-door scrimmages. Those are things we'll find out at a later date. But this is a fun slate of games, and hopefully we'll get an opportunity to see most, if not all, of these games in action. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Isaac and I will be back with you on Friday for our first conference preview episode of the year. I know it feels early, but we're 9 weeks away from the start of the college basketball season. We got 9 different conferences that we're going to give full episode previews to, starting on Friday with the ACC. We're talking Duke, we're talking Carolina, we're talking a new look Louisville team, all coming up on Friday's episode. Definitely hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet and come hang out with us for Friday's show. That's going to do it for me today. Thanks again for listening, folks. Until next time, as always, peace.